Thank you. Thank you very much. As many of you are aware, and great to have you here, good testimony today. As many of you are aware, the Southwest Chief is vitally important to many of the senators on this dais and to the communities we represent. I'm grateful for the work of my friends on this committee, Senators Moran and Gardner, as well as the work of Senators Heinrich, Roberts, and Bennett. This bipartisan coalition of senators proves that we can work together on issues of common interest to our constituents. As you may recall, nearly a year ago, the Senate voted on my Sense of the Congress amendment, 92-6, to support the importance of the national network for Amtrak. And I don't think that support has diminished since. President Anderson, thank you for our recent discussion and for changing course for now, an action that would that's on discontinuing the Southwest Chief, an action that would be a disservice to Amtrak customers and hurt all communities on the line between Dodge City, Kansas, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was very discouraged to hear you say that you are looking at breaking up long-distance routes. That wasn't in your written testimony quite that strongly, but I want to take a big disagreement with that. You know, while progress has been made, I am confident that the threat is not over. I see that Amtrak continues to blame Congress and others for budgetary woes when it's convenient, yet when tasked with engaging with stakeholders, you are slow to do so. Last year, when Amtrak wasted resources proposing to disband the Southwest Chief, I repeatedly requested Amtrak engage directly with our active stakeholders, but we don't seem to be there yet. According to Mr. Subi's testimony, Amtrak has not even responded to a written request for stakeholder engagement. When Congress rejects Amtrak's corridor plan, it appears that Amtrak will once again be left without a real vision for a national network. That is deeply disappointing. Amtrak must develop a visionary and bold plan to preserve and improve long-distance rail for the American public. Mr. Subi, first, thank you for your efforts to save Southwest Chief. Our present success staving off discontinuation of service wouldn't have happened without your efforts. Your testimony highlights the lack of transparency from Amtrak's leadership, recognizing you continue to work with many dedicated Amtrak employees. What is the evidence of the willingness of top management in Amtrak to meaningfully engage with stakeholders?
I hate to be speaking for Amtrak, Senator, but my opinions on this are they should be. We have a great example of this, and that is we went to Amtrak 5 years ago and asked them to help us restore ski train service in Colorado. And we presented a business plan, and the railroad responded. They sent executives out to Colorado. They met with the Winter Park Resort executives. They met with ColoRail, our advocacy group. They met with the Union Pacific Railroad, and in fact, that ski train service, with great support from this committee and our Colorado senators, as well as our governor, that ski train service is restored. It just had its most successful year ever this past year, and hopefully Amtrak can renegotiate a new contract with the Union Pacific and continue that service. So my example of how Amtrak ought to behave is exactly that particular effort. I'll say one other thing about this issue that I think is extremely important, and it hasn't been touched on yet by Mr. Anderson, and I want to make sure the committee hears this, and that is the way Amtrak evaluates long-distance service, or any of its services, is purely based on metrics related to passenger trips. And the greatest value of the long-distance trains are the economic and social benefits they bring to the communities they serve. And no doubt that rural communities aren't going to have as many passengers boarding and alighting the system as you do in a heavy metropolitan area. But the interesting fact is that in the 3 states, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico, that the Southwest Chief runs through, the economic and social benefits total $180 million a year. And the Amtrak asserts that it costs $60 million a year to run that train over all 8 states. And so there's something wrong with that equation when they're not taking into account the value that it brings. It's a public transportation system. Most public transportation systems return about 50% on their fare box recovery. But they're necessary because that's how people get to work, and so we provide support for them, public support. And that argument never appears in any of Amtrak's statements about these services. I'll also note that when Mr. Anderson replied to the earlier question about long-distance trains, he didn't mention the Southwest Chief, which was disturbing, but, you know, I accept that as just a minor item compared to this value argument. It has to be a part of this equation. I know you understand it, and I know all of our mayors, county commissioners, city managers all along the route understand that. It's intrinsically understood. We just finished research on this where we actually have documented those values, and that's where that $180 million amount comes from. And we've looked at the Empire Builder. It returns over $530 million a year, and I think it's subsidized or supported by federal funds to the extent of about $50 or $60 million a year, just like the Southwest Chief. So we're talking about a huge public return on that federal investment, and it needs to be a part of that equation. If you just go on passenger boardings, well, yeah, we're going through small communities, La Junta, Colorado, Lamar, Trinidad, communities that have 15,000, maybe 20,000 residents. You're not going to have that ridership. But when you think about the value, the economic and social value of that train to that community, it's immense. And that's why we support it. And that's why most elected officials and others sense that. They get that. We finally documented at the Rail Passengers Association, working with the Trent Lott Institute, we documented how you can discover those economic benefits. And we've published a report to that effect, and I've shared it with, I think, the committee staff, and I know I've shared it with our Colorado Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Suby.
Mr. Chairman, could I just thank him for that very powerful statement, and I hope, President Anderson, you were listening to that. I also want to say to Senator Tester, he asked me to not ask too many questions that were in his arena, and I've only asked one. So, Senator Tester, there you go. Yeah.